On a tropical island, there was once a city they called the Paris of the Caribbean. Saint-Pierre, beautiful, wealthy, and alive with 30,000 souls. Above it stood a green mountain the people barely thought about. They called it Pelée. It had slept for generations. In the spring of 1902, the mountain began to stir. Ash drifted down over the rooftops. The ground trembled. Snakes and insects fled down the slopes into the streets. The people grew afraid. Many wanted to leave. But an election was only days away. And the men in power needed the city full. So the people were told there was nothing to fear. The mountain, they promised, would do them no harm. That same week, a man was thrown into the town jail. Locked alone in a cell of solid stone. He didn't know it yet, but those walls were about to save his life. Because on the morning of May 8th, Saint-Pierre had only minutes left to live. To understand what was lost, you first have to see what Saint-Pierre was. It sat on the northwest coast of Martinique, a French island in the Caribbean. In the year 1902, it was the jewel of the island. Around 30,000 people lived and worked here. They called it the Paris of the Caribbean. Its streets climbed the hillside in rows of pale stone houses. Cool water ran down channels along the cobbled lanes. There was a grand theatre that seated hundreds, a cathedral, fine shops and elegant cafes. Ships from around the world filled its wide blue harbour. The city grew rich on sugar and rum. Barrels of rum were shipped from here across the seas. It was a place of music, colour and life. People of many backgrounds shared its crowded streets. Among them was a young labourer, strong and quick-tempered, a man who lived on the rough edges of the city. He was no one important, just one of 30,000. Above the city to the north rose a green mountain, Mount Pelée, nearly 1,400 meters high. Its slopes were lush with forest and crossed by streams. At its summit sat a quiet crater lake. Families would hike up it for picnics on clear days. The mountain had stirred before, long ago, and done little harm. To the people below, it was simply part of the view. Beautiful, familiar, harmless. No one studied it, no one feared it. They did not know what a mountain like this could do, and they had no idea how little time they had left. In the middle of April, the mountain began to change. At first, it was almost nothing. A thin plume of steam rising from the summit, a faint smell of sulfur drifting on the wind. Then came the ash. Fine grey powder began to fall on the city. It settled on rooftops, gardens and streets. The smell of sulfur grew stronger. The ground beneath the city trembled. At the summit, the old crater lake began to boil. Then, on the 5th of May, the mountain killed for the first time. A wall of boiling mud broke loose from the slopes. It roared down a river valley toward the sea. It buried a sugar works in moments, killing dozens. The mud reached the harbour and sent a wave across the bay. Fear began to spread through Saint-Pierre. And then came something stranger still. Driven from the mountains, snakes poured down into the city. Deadly fer-de-lance vipers by the hundreds. They killed livestock, and some of the people too. Giant centipedes and swarms of ants came with them. It was as if the mountain was emptying itself of life. The ash kept falling, thicker now. By day, the sky over the city turned dark. Birds fell silent. Horses panicked in the streets. People crowded into the cathedral to pray. Many now wanted to flee the city for good. The road south, away from the mountain, began to fill. But the people would not be allowed to leave so easily, because powerful men had reasons to keep them exactly where they were. In 1902, Martinique was preparing to vote. A crucial election was set for the 11th of May. Saint-Pierre was the heart of the island's politics. Its thousands of voters could decide the result. If the city emptied, the election could be lost. The governor of the island was a man named Louis Moutet. He did not want a panic. He did not want an evacuation. He needed Saint-Pierre full and calm. So the authorities took action. A commission was sent to study the mountain. It declared that the city was in no real danger. The local newspaper printed the reassuring news. The mountain, it said, threatened no one in Saint-Pierre. People were told it was safer to stay than to leave. Soldiers were posted on the roads out of the city. Some who tried to flee were turned back. To calm the people, the governor came to the city himself. He brought his wife and stayed in Saint-Pierre. It was meant to prove there was nothing to fear. He would die there with her days later. And so the city stayed full, even as the mountain roared. Refugees from the countryside even poured in, seeking safety, swelling the doomed city with still more lives. Meanwhile, in the streets, an ordinary drama played out. Days earlier, a young laborer had been arrested. He had wounded another man in a fight. He was thrown into the city jail to await trial. On the 7th of May, he tried to escape. As punishment, he was dragged into a cell of solid stone, a windowless dungeon that would soon become the safest place in Saint-Pierre.
The morning of the 8th of May began like any other. It was a holiday, Ascension Day. The bells of the cathedral rang out across the city. Families dressed for the morning service. Ships sat at anchor in the calm blue harbor, the market filled with people and noise. High above, the mountain had fallen strangely quiet. At 8:02, it tore itself apart. A side of the mountain burst open, and a black cloud exploded outward toward the city. It was not lava. It was something far deadlier. A glowing cloud of gas and ash, hotter than a furnace. Heavier than air, it hugged the ground, and it raced downhill at the speed of a hurricane. It crossed the miles to Saint-Pierre in less than a minute. There was no time to run, no time even to understand. In an instant, the cloud swept over the city. Its heat was near 1,000 degrees. In moments, every living thing in its path was gone. 30,000 people died in about 2 minutes. Stone walls were knocked flat. Iron was twisted. Great casks of rum burst into flame and flooded the streets with fire. In the harbor, ships were set ablaze and capsized. Of the many vessels, almost none survived. A wall of fire and ash had erased an entire city. And deep in his stone cell, the prisoner was still alive. Searing air poured through the tiny food slot in his door. He was burned, gasping, crying out for help, but the thick walls held back the worst of the heat. Above him, where a city had stood, there was now only silence and fire.
When the cloud passed, Saint-Pierre was gone. Where a city had stood, there was only ruin, mile after mile of smoking, blackened stone. The grand theatre, the cathedral, the markets, all flattened. Fires burned across the wreckage for hours, and everywhere, the dead. Nearly 30,000 people gone in minutes. Out at sea, ships had watched the city die. In the harbor, vessels burned to the waterline. A few scorched survivors were pulled from the water. On one ship, the Roraima, dozens had been killed. The few left alive were terribly burned. Word of the disaster raced around the world. At first, no one could believe the numbers. An entire city wiped out in a single morning. Rescue ships arrived from nearby islands, but there was almost no one left to rescue. The governor and his wife were among the dead. The men who promised safety had perished with the city. Sailors walked through streets full of the fallen. The heat had been so great it left strange scenes. Clocks across the city had all stopped at the same moment. 8 o'clock and 2 minutes, the exact instant the city had died. Scientists would later give the killer a name, a nuée ardente, a glowing cloud. Saint-Pierre had taught the world a terrible new word and shown what a mountain like Pelée could truly do. But amid all that death, a faint hope remained. For somewhere beneath the ruins, one man was still breathing.
For days after the eruption, rescuers searched the ruins. They found almost no one alive. The city had become a vast, silent graveyard. Then, around 4 days later, they heard it. A faint human voice crying out from beneath the rubble. It came from the ruins of the town jail. They dug down to a thick-walled cell, and inside they found a man still alive. It was the prisoner, locked away days before. He was badly burned across his back and legs. He had lain in darkness for days, in agony, without water. But he had survived the death of a whole city. His tiny stone cell had shielded him from the cloud. The punishment that caged him had also saved him. He later described the moment the heat came, a sudden blast of searing air through the door. He had screamed and waited to die, but he did not. His name was Ludger Sylbaris, and he became one of the most famous survivors in history. He toured the world with a traveling circus, billed as the man who lived through the end of the world. Saint-Pierre itself never truly recovered. A small town stands there now among the old ruins. The shell of his cell still sits there to this day. Scientists learned to fear the glowing clouds of Pelée. The same kind of cloud has killed many times since. But the deeper lesson was about more than science. 30,000 people died because they were told to stay. Because a vote had mattered more than their lives. And the only man spared was the one the city had locked away.